Good morning. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. We're going to start our agenda, and we're going to start off with the 2022-2023 audit presentation by Ron Mininger from our auditing firm. So I'm going to hand it over to Ron.
Thank you, Kara. Good morning, everyone. I'm starting on the table of contents to walk you through the financial statements, the big picture of the financial statements. So as you can see on the table of contents, the financial statements consist of several parts. The first being management's discussion and analysis. Now, that has not been written yet because this is just a draft of the financial statements. Then we have, if we skip down to the governmental funds financial statements, they're on pages 19 through 28. Now, the governmental funds are presented on what's called a modified accrual basis, which means that only cash and short-term receivables and payables are included in those financial statements. So you can see we have a budgetary comparison statement, which I will review next. We have a food service proprietary fund financial statement, and we have fiduciary financial statements that include the scholarship and the student activities accounts. The government-wide financial statements are presented on a full accrual basis. They begin with the balances from the fund statements, and they add long-term assets such as capital assets or fixed assets, and long-term liabilities such as bonds payable, net pension liability, other post-employment benefits liability. And these statements are comparable to how a for-profit business would present financial statements. That is on a full accrual basis. So then we have various notes to the financial statements on pages 29 through 59. They provide a lot of details regarding the numbers shown in the financial statements themselves. Next page, we have required supplementary information. That is basically information regarding the state pension and other post-employment benefits plan. And then lastly, we have the single audit section, which contains a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. And secondly, we have a report on the compliance with the requirements of each major program. So any non-federal agency that expends $750,000 or more in federal funds is required to have a single audit. Now, we have not yet performed that single audit. We are still working out the schedule of findings and the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And we can't start the single audit until we have that in place, but that will be done very shortly. Now, the audit itself, that's the financial statements. The audit itself consists of a report on the financial statements. And this year, that's an unmodified or a clean opinion, as it has been in prior years. Then again, as I noted, we have the auditor's report on internal control. I don't see any issues there at this point, but we haven't conducted the single audit yet. I don't expect any issues. And then the third is the report on the major programs of the school district. So that's the big picture. Let's dive into the financial statements themselves. We'll start with the budgetary comparison statement, and that is on page 23. But we can follow along here in order of presentation. You can see that we have columns for the original budget, the final budget, which includes budget transfers, moving numbers around. We have the actual, that's on a GAAP basis, that's general accepted accounting principles. And then we have the favorable or unfavorable variance. And you can see the Total revenues are 4.1 million higher than budget. Now, the reason for that is real estate taxes were about 2.1 million higher than budget. Investment earnings were 961,000 higher than budget, but we all know that's because of the interest rates have increased. Your basic education subsidy was 477,000 higher than budget, and the state property tax reduction revenue was about 390,000 higher than budget. Now we list expenditures by function, regular programs, special programs, etc. And you can see here at the bottom, total expenditures were 3.4 million over budget. Now, there is an accounting entry to record any new leases or now also software subscription obligations in these financial statements. So what happens when you have a new lease or new subscription? You show the total cost as an expenditure in the year that those agreements are signed, with an accompanying revenue, proceeds from finance purchases. That's $750,000. Can everyone see my cursor as I move it? Good. So there's $750,000 in other finance sources, and then there's $750,000 of expenditures in this area here. So that contributes to the fact that you are over budget on expenditures. Same thing happened last year. So of that $3.4 million over budget, I can tell you that salaries are over budget by about $1.3 million, and benefits are over budget by about $719,000. And then purchase professional and technical services are over budget by about $500,000. Now there is a new line item in these financial statements under other financing sources. We have special items losses. Now that $1.3 million is a write-off of receivables due from resident districts. And that is money that the district is owed back for paying Carson Valley the money that they are due. Now that transaction is supposed to be a wash. The district pays Carson Valley and then recoups the cost of those payments through the resident districts, the largest being the city of Philadelphia. And due to some changes, which I'll highlight in just a few minutes, it's been determined that about 1.3 million of those receivables are not collectible. So down at the bottom, you can see the net change in the fund balance has a positive variance of 234,000. So the ending fund balance is higher than budgeted. And this number right here, that's your ending fund balance for the general fund. That's $23.5 million. So next is the statement of revenues and expenditures for all the governmental funds. This column we just covered, the general fund. The special revenue fund represents student activity accounts for which the district has administrative control, and that is all accounts except for the high school accounts. So beginning last year, we split the student activity accounts, part of them as a special revenue fund, part of those funds remaining shown as custodial funds, fiduciary funds. Now the capital projects or bond fund, current year expenditures total $3.8 million. You floated a bond in the amount of $9.8 million, so that's shown as money coming in as another financing source. That left an increase of $6 million for the year and an ending fund balance of $9.7 million. So the capital reserve fund is funded by fund transfers from the general fund. And you can see that current year expenditures total $1.5 million and resulting in an ending fund balance of $983 million. Now, the next statement I'll highlight is the balance sheet for those same governmental funds. Now, again, at the bottom, this fund balance, there's the $23.5 million that we saw in the budgetary comparison schedule and on the last statement. And that is comprised of cash of investments of nearly $27 million, plus other current assets, some taxes receivable, due from other governments, that is resident districts, 1.3 million, that's after the write-off, plus subsidies receivable of about $2 million. And then you subtract the current liabilities, biggest being accrued salaries and benefits. That includes accrued retirement for the second quarter of 2023. Just a real quick reference, this unavailable revenue taxes receivable. We have taxes receivable up top of $1.4 million, but some of that is going to be collected beyond 60 days. And that's the time period that we measure availability under the modified accrual basis. Remember, these statements are not full accrual. So even though the district expects to collect $1.4 million, 514,000 of that is going to be collected beyond 60 days, and therefore it's not included in fund balance. Now, this assigned fund balance is carried over from last year, $19 million. After this presentation, I understand that management will determine whether the components of that should be altered for the final version of the financial statements. All right, from here, we'll go to let me show you regarding those fund balance assignments. This is a schedule that is in the notes in the draft, but all these numbers are last year numbers. Now, some of these numbers don't change from year to year, but again, I know management wants to take a look at these numbers and see if adjustments are appropriate. So next we'll go to the statement of net position. Now this is the full accrual financial statements, what's called the government-wide financial statements. We have one column for governmental activities. They're all the governmental funds, the general fund, capital reserve, capital projects funds. And again, we start with the balances from the fund statements and add in long-term assets. You can see right here, land, buildings, other capital assets. We have construction in progress as of June 30th. We have funds held by CPAST right here, $1.5 million, which is not shown in the fund financial statements. And then you can see the largest liability is the bonds payable, which is included in here. Current portion of $5 million, long-term portion of $101 million. We have some lease obligations. We have compensated absences that are expected to be paid out in the long term. We have net other post-employment benefits. And the net pension liability is a very large number. That is the district share of PSER's liability. Now, because that number is so high, it creates a negative net position of $50 million. And this is the case with all the districts. There is just one exception for, but it's not a district, it's a VOTEC, where that number doesn't go negative. Then we'll look at the proprietary fund, the food service financial statement. You can see that operating revenues were $567,000 for the year. Operating expenses are $1 million. But that deficit, this operating loss, is subsidized with state and federal food subsidies. So overall, you had a change in that position of 20,000 positive, and you end the year with a fund balance or net position of $215,000. Now that ending balance consists of, on the balance sheet, $91,000 in cash and $112,000 in fixed assets. I will focus on the unrestricted part of the ending net position, which is $102,000. That $112,000 for fixed assets is locked in. It's not available to be spent in the future. And those are the main components of the financial statements. There are a few open items. One will need a legal letter from the solicitor, but we always wait until the very end of the audit to obtain that. I understand that there are no legal issues that would need to be disclosed in the financial statements. Again, the schedule of expenditures of federal awards is nearly complete, but that is a schedule that you really want to nail down, because if it's off by $100, you'll get a letter in the mail from one of the funders, particularly Pennsylvania Department of Education. The single audit will be performed soon. And then, of course, Kara will be working on management's discussion and analysis. Also, at the end of the audit, we typically will issue a separate report that represents a summary of the audit findings, and I say findings not in a bad way. We talk about accounting principles used by the district. Any significant estimates will highlight in that report. Any important financial statement disclosures contained in the notes. Any other issues encountered during the audit, which I have not encountered. And then highlight any significant dollar audit adjustments. And we've reviewed that in the past. I don't expect anything out of the ordinary. And that's it. Are there any questions?
I did have one. I'm just curious. The information was very comprehensive. Thank you. I just had I made a note here about the uncollected taxes notation, and the calculation I think was 516,000. I'm just curious how did you arrive at that? Because is that a prediction?
Well, we look at, based on historical collection of earned income tax, we can estimate the total that we expect to collect that was earned through June 30th, 2020.
Okay.
So we know exactly what was collected in July and August of 2023, and that's what we accrue back for the fund statements. So then the difference between the total we expect based on historical collections and that 60-day window is the $500,000.
Okay. And then will that get offset, I guess, by what comes in after that 60-day period?
Well, it does. So
okay.
July and August 2023 revenues have already been recognized, so they won't be recognized again next year. And then anything that comes in September and beyond is, will be revenue next year. So really,
understood. Thank you.
Let me just take this all the way back. And I'll show you what I mean. So we could have just reported 900,000 here, and that would have been what was collected in July and August. But so that you see the same number here as in the full accrual statements, we show this as gross, the total, and then back out the $500,000 down here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Hey, thank you,
Okay.
Ron.
I'd just like
yep.
to say that thank Kara and Sam for their hospitality. It's a good audit. I enjoy it, and I thank you for having me.
Appreciate it, Ron. Thank you so much. We will, if you can stop sharing your screen now.
Okay.
But we will let you, you don't have to stay through the rest of the meeting. You can go rest.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Feel better.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Ron.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify a couple things, and then next steps as far as the audit is concerned. So I wanted to kind of go back a little bit, talking about the budget variances, both on the revenue and the expenditure side. So while one of the measures is, yes, the budget to actuals, we also look at the revenue versus the expenditure of actuals. So I'm trending right where I need to be on the actuals. It's smoothing out the budget versus the actual piece. So on the revenue side, Ron identified and touched upon some things. There are some variables that were unexpected. I'm still gauging collection rates. Our collection rates are going up with real estate taxes. We have a very, very strong and healthy real estate tax collection rate. So I'll continue to gauge in that direction with that. Obviously, interest earnings, a lot of people reduced that number because of where the economy was, and then interest rates flipped. So we were able to do a really good job of investing. So we realized some revenue on that end. On the expenditure end, it's just really smoothing out from my transition here with salaries and benefits. That's the big area in the expenditure side. But again, we're trending on the right path where I'm not out of balance on where my projections are as far as where revenues are going to be versus expenditures and use of fund balance. I'm also going to jump into that too, because this was a little bit of a cleanup year for the audit. There are times when you transition from one management to another, that there's some outstanding items or things that get carried. I'll use an example. There was a dental liability that was on the books, and it trended back for a few years. Sam did her due diligence to make sure that she could see if she could identify where that number was just carried over prior to either myself or her coming on board. So in talking to Ron, we made the decision to clean up the books a little bit, because it's just going to carry over and over and over on our books if we don't do something with it. So this was actually a good year because we had such a positive year of not dipping into fund balances as much as I anticipated. The other area that we really talked about was Carson Valley. And when we presented to the board talking about Carson Valley, we knew that there were some issues that the district was kind of eating some costs because of the new contract that we were in with Carson Valley. So a couple things that got written off and that we've identified is there's a couple of students that are considered wards of state. Wards of state, that's a state reimbursement for those costs. They do not fully cover the Carson Valley tuition. They pay the daily tuition rate. So that gap between what Carson Valley charges us and what we recoup from the state, the district is the one that absorbs that cost. Also, we've talked about kind of some work throughs with Philly. That's the biggest group that we have. There are some non-special education students that transition through Carson Valley. At this point, we are charged the daily rate from Carson Valley. And Philadelphia pushes back saying that they're non-special ed students, so that they're only going to pay the tuition rate. At this point, Nicole Schrage and Megan Dennis are working through that issue so that we stop absorbing those costs. But you have to remember that this goes back to 2021. So we cleaned up 2021 all the way through the current audit, and that's why the write-off was so big. And speaking with Dr. Yannicone, I told her we're going to clean up as much as we can with that to kind of take it off the books and obviously continue our recoup effort in the event that we do or able to recoup some of those costs that we wrote off. We will see it on the flip side in a future audit that we recouped it and that there was a gain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Karen, thank you. It's Karen. I just have a question about kind of those costs going forward. And if
Sure.
we have a sense of, I mean, I know population will fluctuate all the time, but do we have a sense of whether we are going to continue to incur costs and in what areas we will incur them, that we're not going to be able to recoup?
Sure. I think
Does that
one
make
area,
sense?
yes, it absolutely does. So there's 3 areas. Like I said, word of state, there's nothing we can really do about that unless legislation changes with PDE. They're reimbursing us for word of state. We don't have a lot of word of states, but there's 1 or 2 that come through during the year. The second piece is the regular education student rate versus the Carson Valley rate. Right now, like I said, Megan Dennis and Nicole Schrage are working to come up with a solution to that so that it evens out and that we're able to recoup at a regular ed rate, especially with the school district of Philadelphia. The third piece is there are times as students transition, and again, Philadelphia is the biggest group with this, that we need to make sure that the paperwork is shored up so that their IEP is signed, that all the paper and document showing that the student is a special ed student, so that we can totally recoup that rate. Nicole Schrage has worked very, very diligently making sure that there's procedures and processes in place. So as we're seeing the billing happen this year and moving forward, I believe that that number has come down. Again, we were putting things in place and working through some contract issues. And that number that you saw went all the way back to 2021 because we were carrying that on our books. So we did some cleanup stuff on that end. And again, moving forward, I believe with the addition of Nicole and the work that her and Megan are doing, that we will see that the onus on the district is less and less.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I have another question, but I don't want to like derail the topic either if people have other questions.
Any other questions on the audit?
No.
Dr. Taratusky, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually about the activities funds. And I guess I just kind of want to be clear about what he means by what we have control over and what we don't. And I guess the history on this question is several years ago, maybe I know before you were here and before Mary Jo was here, there was some mishandling of activities funds at the high school. And I kind of just want to understand how it is we continue to look at, keep track of, and have quote unquote control over the funds for our activities.
Sure. So the student activity funds are in a separate fund itself. It's not commingled with the general fund or any of our other funds. Each club has their own account. So any transactions that go in and out of that account is accounted for individually for that account. All of those things come through the finance office, any funds collected, any disbursements going out. So we're keeping control of that. They also, because they are even though we're the custodian of the account, and we don't have say over how the funds are used, they still have to follow the district's purchasing policy and guidelines because we are the custodian of the account and it's on our bank account. No one can withdraw without coming through our office. Nobody can go up to the bank, can take funds out. As far as the handling of funds and everything at the high school, Mr. LaRocca, he is in charge of student activities. He works with Dave Giordano. who is the activities and athletics administrative assistants. Everything flows through that office. They follow the control process of the district and of the business office. They are in contact with us. The other thing that has helped in the big collections is we moved to an online ticketing system for football. It's hometown ticketing. We've started to dive into using that online system for collections for prom, homecoming, the plays. So those are your big money items where normally you would get a lot of cash and have cash kind of out of the control of the business office, where we're now seeing that money come through online. So there's less handling of actual cash. So I'm very confident in our controls and the processes that we have in place for that outside handling of money.
Okay, can you just clarify then, there was a distinction that our auditor made between activities funds that were reviewed in the audit and high school funds. Can you explain that a little bit?
So it's just how he's classifying them in the financials. So the high school is obviously your biggest student activity group. Student activities at all levels. Middle school has a student activity as well. The elementaries not so much. They have little ones. But the high school is your big one. That's the one where the bread and butter of your activity and clubs are. So those are identified in the audit under a different section, and then the rest, the middle school and the elementary items, are in that special revenue account that he's talking about. So it's not that it's not that they're accounted for or handled differently as far as process. It's just how he's classifying them in the audit.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, we're going to move on, and I'm going to share my screen, so hold tight. And can everybody see this? Yes? Okay, so we went through the audit presentation, so we're going to give a budget update for the 24-25 budget. Not going to go through this, but we like to always remind everybody why we are doing budget. So these are our guiding principles that take us through on why we're putting this budget together. I just want to talk about budget planning and what drives that. So on the revenue side, as you all know, the local funding sources derive 80% of our total revenues. And the big chunk of that is our property taxes. The other big chunk is our earned income taxes. We get about 19% of total revenues from the state with those subsidies listed, and then about 1% from our federal government. I just want to make a notation that ESSER funding is expiring September 30th of 2024. And so those funds are being weaned out of our budget. They will not be reflected in our budget because those funds are expiring and we have to use them by September of 2024. On the expenditure side, as you would expect, salary and benefits make up the biggest chunk of our budget on the expense side at 72% of total expenditures. Our debt service is about 13% of total expenditures. Our building and department budget, so the resources and services, are about 11.5%. And then we have some fixed costs such as utilities, our leases, and some of our outsourced services. That's about 3.5% of our total expenditures. So right now during this process, what's happening is we are collecting information. The building and department budget administrators all have their information and they're starting to compile their individual budgets. So we're starting to slowly piece together information. It is very early in the process, so we're still waiting on some information. So as that information comes to us, we plug that into the budget, and then we're putting it all together so that in March we can present a first look for the finance committee. So I am going to actually turn this over to Dr. Yannicone so she can talk about the ESSER funds.
Thanks, Kara. I just wanted a minute to be able to clarify where these areas are going to be, where we're going to have to absorb within next year's budget items that we have been providing through the pandemic using the ESSER funds. And so initially you see their intervention and instructional support. So we'll be absorbing these 4 positions into the staffing budget. This is probably the greatest challenge of Kara's budget plan for this coming school year. because we have the two math specialists at Enfield and Erdenheim, and the two special education teachers at Erdenheim in the middle school, who we have been funding through the ESSER dollars. And so it's our intention to maintain these positions, our caseloads, and the needs of our students at the elementary schools with regard to math intervention are suggesting that we need to continue to have these positions in place. And so we'll be absorbing that into the staffing budget. We also, several years ago, you may recall, started a 5-year cybersecurity plan after we had seen some pretty significant impacts to districts across the country with regard to security breaches. So we have absorbed into the technology budget planning for next year the annual license renewals for some of the different systems that we've added into place to be able to the best, to our best ability, ensure that we are not hacked in the way that some other districts, both in the state and across the country, have been hacked. We also
I just want to say,
yeah,
Mary Jo,
yeah.
thank you very much for doing that, because Great Valley is under attack at this point, and we have lost access to our internet servers, everything. It's really been very uncomfortable. So I just want to say for the committee and the board that's on here that this is an extremely, extremely important move for our district.
Yeah, it's one of those areas. I'm sorry to hear that, Karen. And speaking with some of my neighbors and and fellow superintendents across the country at different conferences, living through that type of a hack is just unbelievably difficult and a huge liability because of so much information, human resources information, student data that is held within our systems. It's critical that we allocate these resources. It's not inexpensive, but it's one of those things where you're glad you have it. It's like insurance, it's glad you have it when you need it. Otherwise, it feels painful to pay for. But we feel very confident with our cybersecurity plan, and things are working extremely well for us right now. Mental health resources and student support, we've also added, because as everyone knows, mental health concerns across the country have really increased as students have emerged from the pandemic, and we are absorbing those costs into our support services and staffing budget. So we added a psychologist position this year. So we now have one school psychologist at each of our 4 buildings. We've continued our partnerships with outside agencies. For example, our on-site counseling services through Aldersgate. And then we also have purchased some resources and materials to be able to utilize with our students. Some of that is testing materials. Some of that are additional resources, including social emotional learning resources, our contract with Second Step. And so those training resources and materials, all of that we are absorbing in 24-25. So even though technically we have July, August, and September, about a third of the 24-25 school year, we know that those funds are going away. And so we're trying to budget fully for all of these expenses within next year's budget. Are there any questions about that? All right, thanks, Kara.
Thank you. Okay, so we touched upon this at the last meeting, and I know Mr. DeFranco had a couple questions. So I wanted to go through talking about the introduction of a property tax rebate program. I've been doing a lot of research into this. This slide identifies and talks about the state Department of Revenue property tax rebate program that's offered to seniors, widowers that are 50 years or older, and permanently disabled individuals that are 18 years or older. So this kind of identifies and tells you what the guidelines are for the state property tax rebate program. The maximum rebate is $650. There's a formula based upon income, based upon a application that you have to fill out, and additional information. I provided the website there for the state. And I had talked about that there are districts in Montgomery County that they do locally funded programs that mirror the state program. So about 73% of Montgomery County school districts have implemented a local property tax rebate program. eligibility qualifications, they all mirror the Pennsylvania property tax rebate program as far as qualifications. As far as funding, it's a local decision. What I'm seeing is a trend between 50% and 100% match of this state program. But like I said, that amount or what percent is funded is determined by each district. And where we're at right now is that we are recommending to implement this program for the upcoming budget year and tax year. We would like to provide relief to Springfield taxpayers on a fixed income. That's the benefit of this. With this, it's a 3-prong for those individuals that take advantage of all areas. So you have the state program, it will be the local program, and then also individuals that qualify for the homestead, farmstead rebate. So between those 3, I believe it totals to about $1,500, $1,800 total, that gives property tax relief, for those individuals. So our recommendation is to mirror the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue rebate program, at 100%. I did some research as far as other districts on the cost, because that cost is absorbed by the district. So the anticipated budget impact, which we won't know until we see participation, but what I've seen at other districts, it's about $30,000 to $40,000 is what the budget impact is for implementing this program. So our next steps would be to establish a program process and procedures. And then at some point prior to the adoption of the 24-25 budget, the board would need to pass a resolution approving the implementation of the program. So that's where we're at in this piece of looking at the program. It's in its infancy stage right now, so we can have some discussion on that if there's questions about how this works, about who would be eligible. That's all going to be teased out in the next couple of months. Is there any questions on this?
I have, I guess, a question. Maybe it's more of a statement. I don't know. I've always been disappointed by the state's program. And I'm sure, you know, it's based on the income ranges. I mean, we're basically looking at in my mind, it seems like a very small number of people that actually qualify for these programs. And then the relief doesn't seem like it's very impactful. And I know that this is not our issue at a local level. It's just at the state level, it seems wholly inadequate. And so I understand, like, it makes sense on the local level to copy the state, because at least it's a framework and a structure that's in place. It just, like, is this providing enough relief for anybody to truly maintain their households here if they're, you know, really making less than $300 a week as a renter, or $800 a week as a homeowner? And is there anything else we could do rather than just mimic the state's program? I mean, I guess, you know, these are fixed amounts that we're talking about. Like, is there any way we could offer like property tax relief for these older Springfield residents where if eventually their household, their families sell their home or something like that, that you could recollect deferred increases on their taxes? Or is that like completely impossible or beyond?
Or when you say that, do you mean kind of pass it off to the person that buys the house?
No, so like, let's say, all right, so this rebate's based on their income.
Correct.
And it's a fixed amount. But let's say instead of this, an alternative would be, okay, they've been paying this tax. Well, here we are raising the taxes because our costs go up. So we have to raise the taxes on everybody in Springfield. What if we look at qualified residents? And I'm not sure how we would qualify them, but it would be some sort of fixed income. And we say, okay, we're raising taxes on everybody except for these residents. And then we keep a tabulation of what they're not paying as they stay in their house. Now, somebody goes into retirement, somebody passes away, an estate comes in, whatever happens, somebody is going to ultimately sell that house and benefit from you know, the increase in equity of having that home and increases of home values. And at that point, you basically get back whatever rebates, whatever discounts you were providing to that household. And then it allows people to stay in their home. I mean, this is not fully fleshed out. It's like, how could we keep them at a point where they're used to spending, and then at some point make the district whole again by participating in the benefits of their real estate values.
That's understood. I mean, our program, it's a local program, so it doesn't have to match the state. I mean, we can kind of take a look at where, or you can give direction on where you think this should land. I think the tough part is, what is the income level? What is, what information is provided right now? The application process, you know, they have to show proof of income. Obviously, Social Security benefits, I believe 50% of them do not count. So anybody receiving Social Security, it's negated through that.
Okay.
So it's really hitting the neediest of seniors, or people on fixed income. I guess we'd have to make a threshold, and we have to talk about what level do we consider somebody not being able to afford the property taxes or the increases that we're doing. I understand the concept that you're saying. We would just have to flush it out in our guidelines and where we're looking at. I think we can maybe look at trying to find a happy medium. But just know that as we expand that, the liability to the district does go up. Because
Right.
you have to supplement for people that are eligible. And right now with participation, I don't have a way of understanding what people would be eligible and what people wouldn't, and how many people that would be.
So that type of information is not available from the state to see who's participating there.
I'm trying to work through the county. The
Mhm.
state's not going to release those records. But that's why a lot of people, in order to qualify for this program at the local level, they have to qualify at the state. So then they're already providing the information with the state, and they show us their application and their information, so that we're not digging even further to find out additional information. It's kind of like a one deal package. So
Gotcha.
like I said, we can, I hear the things that you're saying, and we can, you know, I can most definitely research that and look to see what kind of program we can put together. But with that, there does come some additional cost to the district. And yes, you are correct that we would recoup it if they sell, because then the people that they sell to wouldn't necessarily be, they would not be eligible for the rebate. It's a little tough when you're trying to track tax piece to say, because obviously when we're doing our tax bills, just like with the homestead farmstead, it's a credit on there. We'd have to figure out, like, trying to track who would be eligible for a tax increase and who wouldn't. So that
Yeah.
gets a bit tricky. But I can most definitely go back to the drawing table. Dr. Yannicone and I can have some discussion on looking at the guidelines, and if I can collect any county data to see, you know, what our population is, and see if I can get any information to see who we would be helping, and kind of get a gauge on that. I can most definitely come back with that.
Okay, I appreciate you looking into it. I mean, I know this is what I'm proposing is extremely complicated. I just, these rebates, it's always frustrated me that it doesn't seem like it's enough.
I don't disagree. When I went on the state and saw the guidelines, it is tough. The other thing, you know, that it's kind of the devil in the details. What we don't know is what we don't know. So we can even start the initial year mirroring the state, and then we can kind of see what the participation is, and see where things gauge, and if it does draw a lot of participation, because maybe it's more than what we think.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I think so. Maybe we move forward with this piece, since it's kind of proven in other districts, and then if we need to tease it out in future years, we can do that after we see where participation and eligibility requirements are, because maybe we do need to loosen them. But at this point, I wouldn't know until we actually implement the program.
I like that idea.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, so going back to the budget piece of this, we've been doing this for the last couple of years. We've kind of shied away from doing the preliminary budget and applying for exceptions. And what we're doing is doing the opt-out resolution. So what I'm asking is at the next board meeting to adopt the opt-out resolution, which basically the school board certifies that we will not raise property taxes that exceed the Act 1 index of 5.3%. Again, the Act 1 index is 5.3%. As we've alluded to, everybody else is paying a higher cost for things. So this number is a little bit higher because, as it has been in the past, because we know what the economy looks like. As people have to go to the grocery store and pay more, so does the district when we're purchasing the same items that we've always purchased. So just some numbers that you see, the certified tax duplicate assessed value, that is the overall assessed value in Springfield Township that taxes get put against, that our millage gets put against. That number is going to change slightly. That gets certified every year. I have usually at the end of November, I get a estimate, and then in January I get the certified number. So that number is going to slightly change, but that was last year's number. And then the allowable millage increase under our Act 1 index is 1.9827 mills, or it would generate an additional about $2.6 million in tax revenue. So at this point, what administration is recommending is that at the November 21st meeting, that the board approve the opt-out resolution to move forward in the budget process. Is there any issues or concerns with that?
Sounds like a plan. I like the way it worked last year.
Thanks, Kara.
Okay. And then this is just the calendar and the process. So this is November 21st meeting, some upcoming meetings. February 9th is the deadline for everybody to get their budgets to me. So everybody's working hard to get that done. The February 15th Finance Committee meeting, and we'll talk about this in the next slide. We're going to talk about our May 2024 finance plan and then have another update for the budget. And then in March, that'll be the first look for the Finance Committee to see the full budget for 24-25. And then you can see the other dates that we have. June 18th is going to be our final adoption. So I wanted to revisit this because we are in the mix of the middle school renovations and addition project. Last meeting, I also went over our borrowing plan, but I just wanted to revisit it and kind of give an update on where we're at in the process. So we are on track to borrow $30 million over the next 3 years for this project. Our current project budget is about $31.5 million. With our borrowing plan, we're planning on taking increments of $10 million. That's bank qualified debt. We get lower interest rates on that. That will be discussed at the February Finance Committee meeting that I just talked about. Jamie Doyle and her team will be there to talk about the resolutions we need to do, the timeline, the approval from the board to do our $10 million bank qualified borrowing, which will be going towards the middle school renovations and addition project. In December, there will be a property committee meeting where there will be a design team update on where we've gotten to so far on this project. And then in January of 2024, hard to believe I'm saying 2024, there will be a public meeting and it'll be a presentation of draft plans to the community. Are there any questions on this slide? Okay. So we're going to get to the high school scoreboard replacement. I am not sure if either of you have been apprised of what's happening with our current scoreboard. I'm sure you have. This is a picture of our current scoreboard, and yes, you can see the numbers are all wonky and wacky. A useful life for an outdoor scoreboard is about 10 to 15 years. Our current scoreboard is about 11 years old. It's in poor working condition. We have made multiple efforts to repair it both internally and through external companies. We are having frequent outages that is causing disruption to our athletic contests. So what we've done is there was a team of us, including Joe Ferraro, Dr. Yannico, and myself, Brandon Lutz, our director of IT, Craig Thorne, facilities director. We sat and we looked at options of replacing the scoreboard. Our goal is to replace it by spring because, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Yannico, that's the next group that's consistently using the scoreboard. Yes. Okay, so wanted to show you option one. If you see option one, this is what it looks like. And yes, there's a video board. One of the things when we were looking at options, because it's a big different look of what we have and what we're looking at. One of the things that we're thinking about is that this is a 10 to 15 year purchasing decision. So what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to just say, okay, we're replacing at the same old scoreboard that we purchased 11 years ago. We need to see what's happening, what's upcoming in athletics, in education, and how scoreboards are used and the different functionalities that we have. So this is the format that we're looking at, is to install a scoreboard with a video component. This is option one. As you can see, it has the trellis and then home of the Spartans, and the video board is a little bit tight around that Spartan stadium. You look at the pricing, obviously with the video board included, that increases the price a little bit, but total would be about $188,000 for this option one. Option two, which is, this is the recommended option from administration. Yes, I see the 207. I just saw your eyebrows raise a little there, Mr. DeFranco. If you look at this option, the video board is bigger. It's cleaner without the side piece of this. And looking at the materials, freight, and installation, it's about $207,000. So looking again at our option and our recommendation, we're looking at option two. And again, I think the big thing that we want to relay here is that this is a 10 to 15 year decision. I know that there is a couple of school districts that have gone this route when they've had to replace their scoreboards. I think a lot of districts are going to be put in this position in the near future because their useful life of their scoreboards are going to start to go. And then the decision is going to be, how do we want to replace our scoreboard and what does that look like? So just want to make sure that we didn't come to this decision lightly and just say we want to go for glitz and glamour. We think the video board enhancement extends outside of athletics. During graduation, which we hold in the stadium, the names can be scrolled. We can use it for different things to scroll to students and other features on it. Can use it for homecoming as well. So it does go outside of athletics, and this is not just for athletic use. We are targeting a spring 2024 installation. And what we're looking for is a board motion and approval requested at the November 21st board meeting for option number two. Funding will come from capital reserve for this. So I'm sure there might be a couple questions.
I have a couple questions. So what is the warranty and support for this type of thing? Because I mean, I'm sure all of us are used to it. Anytime you add more computers to something, you're adding to the potential failure points.
Sure, it's a 10-year warranty on the equipment and the board.
Okay. All right. And then my other question is with the price. So I'm seeing roughly a $20,000 difference for just the size of the video screen. And I guess what I'm struggling with is the way that it's depicted. The cheaper screen makes it look like it's smaller, but really, if they're just showing two different scenes on it, it's really not that much smaller of a screen than that top one. So do we really need that extra? What's the LED is, what is it? It's 11.5 by 19 compared with 13 by 22. Like, is that where all that additional cost comes from?
So it's the video board is, yes, that's the difference in the cost.
Okay.
That and the freight. The freight is a little bit higher on option number two. It's at 5,000 because of the video board. Yes.
Okay. So I mean, what is the benefit of that slightly larger video screen?
Do it.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I feel comfortable with either, quite frankly. The athletic department is requesting the second option. The first option you can see here for track and field, and one of the features of the new board that I think is worthwhile to mention is that traditional scoreboards, not unsurprisingly, are are focused on football.
Yeah.
And so you can see that there isn't the ability, for example, for soccer goals or timeouts or lacrosse. All the measurement tools that are used in lacrosse, track and field, and soccer, and even field hockey, don't exist on older scoreboards. They're predominantly for football. And so it's downs and quarters and, all of that. The new board will have the ability for us to modify the categories in the bottom two sections to be able to highlight the specifics of each sport. So it's customizable, which is much more accessible for all of our sports, not just football. The size of the board, the video board, results in a difference in the weight. So how many graphics you have changes the weight of the board. And then in addition, when you have a full-size screen, like you see there on the screen right now, you can incorporate, for example, the top 6 runners in track and field. So you can populate that digital board with either photos, graphics, videos, or individual student names and results. So you can do that for larger or smaller track meets. You can do that. You can do replays, for example, if you have the system in the booth that'll allow that. On the first option, and Kara, if you don't mind just going back to that first screen. On the first option, because the amount of digital display is smaller, it is a lighter board, and then it's also a smaller amount of space to be able to create whatever display or video that you like. And so this is certainly a matter of preference. When we're talking about a 10 to 15 year purchase, the difference in price doesn't seem prohibitive to us if we wanted the larger video board, which is what the athletic department is requesting. But certainly either board is going to provide us the functionality and flexibility that we're looking for. So it's a question of whether we feel the difference between 188 and 207 and the design of the board is worth a 10 to 15 year purchase.
Okay. All right. I mean, I'm not really seeing a huge difference between the two, but at the same time, I wasn't, I trust that that you and your team know what you need. I just I don't know. It seems like a big difference for a little bit more real estate, but I hear what you're saying.
We can certainly go back to the athletic department and share that there was a question as to, if this board option 1 is feasible and will get us where we want to be, can we go with the lower costing board?
Yeah, I mean,
they're both really good looking. They're both going to do what we want them to do.
Yeah, I mean, just from the standpoint of graphics. Oh, and the other thing that I'm not looking at is the pixel matrix. I see that the resolution is significantly higher. I skipped that. I was just looking at the raw size. Yeah, I mean, you're going to be able to put the same graphics on the screen regardless of the size. It's just a matter of, I guess, how it's going to look and how it's going to translate. But yeah, I wasn't looking at the pixels before, and that is.
The digital screen if you flip to option 2, Kara, the digital screen, you can see the difference a little bit here. Obviously, this is off a website.
Yeah.
But this is the higher quality board. And so the idea was, well, for roughly $20,000 or $2,000 a year over the life of the board, even if we only get the shorter life of the board, is it worth it to get the next level up board? And so understandably, the athletic department feels they both offer us the same functionality in that sense. They just felt that it was worth it to spend $19,000 more over the life of the board.
Okay, fair enough.
I have a question about, I know there's always questions from our neighbors about lighting and brightness and things like that. And I just, want to kind of know whether this has the potential to impact our neighbors any differently than the current board, or one board or the other.
It's a
I
good
know
question.
it's used during games. So just want to kind of anticipate any pushback that we might or questions that we might receive from the community.
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question. It's definitely one that we've considered. So the scoreboard would only be functioning and on when we
Mhm.
have contests. So the lights are on
Mhm.
the field, and we are already in play whenever this scoreboard would be utilized. So it wouldn't add any additional time to our use of the stadium or our use of the scoreboard. We currently
Mhm.
use the school board for homecoming to a degree because they put like class of. We currently use the scoreboard obviously for all of our athletic contests, and we've used it for the Relay for Life. And so those are the
Mhm.
areas where we're thinking about it. The one time that we don't currently use the scoreboard that would be added is we've talked about at graduation, you could actually put up the graduation photo of each graduate as
Mhm.
their name was announced.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that would be one added event in June where we would be using the scoreboard at a time that we haven't historically used it.
Mhm. Okay.
The other
Thanks.
component is the height. And so this is a taller board than our current scoreboard. And we have been communicating with the township to ensure that this is within township guidelines as far as the height of the board. Now, this board, almost identical board, is already utilized in several regional high schools. And so we believe that it is well within the guidelines that we would anticipate. But we did reach out to the township with that specific question.
Will it be located at the end of the field where the current board is located, or is there a potential change of location?
It is intended to be in close to that location. We have to, because this is a heavier board, we have to sink new posts, which is part of the installation cost, because the posts that are currently in place are insufficient to carry this board. So it may be slightly to the left or the right, but it will be in essence in the same location. Yeah.
Okay.
We've also talked about whether we should angle it a little bit more towards the bleachers. So it may be a slight shift in its location and orientation, but essentially where it is now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Of course. Are there any other questions? And I think Kara already mentioned this would be coming from capital reserve. So we have funds reserved for this purpose in recurring costs. You know.
And it's a one-time purchase. We're not financing.
One-time purchase, not financing, 10-year warranty.
Okay. Okay, I'm good.
Harry, you want to just unmute?
So sorry. I just want to recap because there's a couple things that are coming out of finance for the board meeting. I want to go back to the audit, and first I'd be 100% remiss if I don't thank Sam for the hard work that she's done on the audit. Again, I said this last year, she came into our district, boots on the ground, and she took over the audit seamlessly, and she's done an excellent job on that. So I just want to acknowledge her for her hard work and thank her for everything that she does, because it does not go unnoticed. So thank you. So next with the audit, we're used to, because we're still in draft phase, and again, the substantial numbers are not going to change. We have to finish up the single audit. The audit has to be accepted by December 31st. What our plan is that we are going to hold off not accepting the audit at the November 21st meeting and do it at the December 5th so that he can finish up the single audit and get us final drafts together so that the board can approve the audit as a whole instead of in draft form. If there are any material or significant changes, obviously we'll bring that back so that the finance committee is aware of that. We do not anticipate any of that happening. He's kind of already dug into a few things here. He's been here since September, so he has kind of a handle on where we are with everything. So that approval of the audit will get pushed back until December. The second thing is the opt-out resolution. We will move forward with that. I think we're all in agreement. You were both in agreement on moving forward with that at the November meeting, correct?
Yeah.
And then,
Yes.
just to
Yes.
follow up with the scoreboard, we are moving forward with the scoreboard and option 2 as recommended, or would you like us to go back to athletics?
No, I'm satisfied with the explanations. I don't know, Karen, how do you feel?
Yeah, I feel I'm okay with it. I guess my concern is that we're not full committee here. So it's just Neil and I right now, and I would like to hear you know what the other folks on the board think, but if we present it to you know, certainly if we go forward with both of those options, or at least present option 2, and then as there are questions, be able to explain option 1 and the decision for that. You know, I'm hoping that the rest of my colleagues will accept that.
We're happy at the board meeting next Tuesday to have Mr. Ferraro there to provide further information. This morning, he was at a suburban athletic directors meeting and so unable to join us. But we can certainly have him at the board meeting next week to answer more specific questions. And we can also give him that feedback with regard to, you know, wanting to understand fully the differences in the quality and the functionality of the 2 options.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
absolutely, no problem.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we can adjourn the meeting. There was no public participation, so no public comment. And then our next meeting, I think, is scheduled for February, hold on one second, February 15th. That is when we have our next meeting scheduled. And that will be again, the $10 million borrowing financing plan for May of 2024 with Jamie Doyle and her team. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody. I know it was a lot of information, so thank you for sticking through, especially audit's not easy to present. So I appreciate you guys sticking through that.
It's
Thank
riveting.
you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you
Everybody have a
both.
good-
All
Have a
right.
good day.
Take care. Thanks.
Take care. Bye.